What's going on, Falcon fans? Welcome back to Pound for Pound ATL. I'm J.R. Clark, and if you're new to this channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. If you're returning to this channel, do me a favor, like, share, and comment. We thoroughly enjoy interacting with y'all on a daily basis, whether it be on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or underneath the comment sections on our videos. So with that being said, let's just go ahead and jump right on into what we're going to talk about today. The Falcons have released their 53-man roster, and that has created a big buzz, obviously, this time of the year. We're 1 week away from the Minnesota game and the start of the season, so it's time to do what we do, which is analyze the roster. The biggest surprise, in my opinion, what I took away from this roster being released was the amount of running backs we're carrying. That took me by complete surprise. I had us carrying 4 running backs total, right? And that would have been Devontae Freeman, Ito Smith, Brian Hill, and Quadre Olison. Those guys, obviously the first two being, your 1A, 1B back type deal. But then Brian Hill and Quadre Olison, the preseason that they had, you couldn't let them go after that, in my opinion. They both showed real strong ability. Especially the last preseason game in Jacksonville when Quadre Olison lined up as a fullback, showing even more versatility out of that position for him. So, speaking of fullbacks, that's where it starts to get somewhat interesting. First, let's talk about Kenyon Barner. Him making the 53-man, I think that is a direct result to the young guys not being able to secure the punt and kick return duties. I mean, even today you saw they had Mohamed Sanu back there practicing punt returns. So that lets you know kind of where they're at on that one. I honestly believe that's why Kenyon Barner made this roster, because he is a proven entity, a proven quantity at that position. But that leads us up to the fullback. Now, originally it was Ricky Ortiz, and that was a name that I thought was not going to make it through the preseason, through the offseason. I was just, I kept waiting, kept checking Twitter going, yep, they're going to cut this guy. Well, they cut him today. They waived him with an injury settlement, but they replaced him with Keith Smith. So they brought in another fullback, and to me that's kind of interesting because I was pretty sure that the times that we needed a fullback, we would have relied on Luke Stoker or even Quadre Olison. But apparently they wanted a dedicated fullback, at least for now, at least for these first few games. And so I thought maybe, okay, this guy, Keith Smith, we were connected to him back in 2018 in that offseason when he was coming out of Dallas, but he ended up signing with Oakland for a year. But they cut him after he played in all 16 games. I mean, I know he only started 3, but fullbacks tend not to start games. So it was good to see him played in all 16 games. So it was interesting that they cut him loose. So I thought maybe this guy, is a better receiving threat, and I'll get into that in a minute, than Ricky Ortiz. But when I looked it up, well, I didn't look it up. My partner looked it up for me while I was driving down the road. But he looked it up and saw that he had I think 69 receiving yards in his career. So that's not necessarily screaming endorsement on the receiving end, right? So I thought to myself, I'm like, why in God's name do they want to bring in another fullback? So led me down kind of like a rabbit hole, right? And I wondered if maybe it was a max protect kind of deal with you're starting with either Ty Sombrello, Gano, or Caleb McGarry at right tackle. So maybe they're bringing in a fullback wanting, some more protection as far as, different formations go. Or it got me really thinking, is this a mandate from Dan Quinn, right? Talking about, getting back to the run game. You're carrying a lot of running backs, 4 quality running backs for sure, 1 punt returner and a fullback. So that's a lot for this team. So that got me thinking about Dirk Koetter and his background and his pedigree, which he said in an article years ago that, he was very much comfortable in the passing game. And within by the time he left here, in 2014, he was really starting to install the four verticals kind of look that he's known for. So I thought to myself, by bringing Koetter back, you're not really signaling that you want to necessarily run the ball heavily. So I got to looking, and his time in Tampa, most of the time, like the 3 years he was there, they had 8 games or fewer with 100 yards rushing. Okay? So to me, that speaks volumes about his commitment to the run game. Well, I know what you're going to say. Well, JR, he didn't really have a good running back down in Tampa Bay. And you're right. He didn't have necessarily a quality running back like we do in Devontae Freeman. And we're hoping Ito Smith carries that through. So I went back and looked when he was here back in 2012, which, was his, one of his pinnacle years, when we went to the NFC Championship, all that jazz. He had 7 games that were under 100 yards. So it doesn't necessarily seem like he really, focuses much on the run game like Dan Quinn seems like he wants, right? So then that led me thinking about they also, the fact that they brought in Mike Mularkey to be the tight ends coach. So I got to looking at his tenure at Tennessee and his tenure here with the Falcons, okay, back in 08 and 09 and all that jazz. And he definitely likes to run the ball. I mean, you could definitely tell that from when he was a head coach in Tennessee. I mean, he has his exotic smash mouth and all that jazz with DeMarco Murray and Derrick Henry and all that. But when I really got to looking at the numbers, he only had, when his time in Tennessee, he averaged around 4 games under 100 yards. So that's 12 games over 100 yards. And the same thing bared out in 08 when he was here with the Falcons, Ryan's rookie year. They had Michael Turner, if y'all remember. We had 4 games under 100 yards. But, again, that's 12 games over 100 yards. So that got me wondering, was Mike Mularkey brought in to balance out the lack of run from Koetter? And then I was like, man, I really hope not, because you hired Koetter to run your offense, right? Dan Quinn went back to doing the defense, trying to do everything he can to replicate that 2016 season, which I can't say that I blame him. But in 2016, you had an offensive coordinator that handled his business, right? He ran the offensive side, and you didn't have to worry about the offensive side. So it seemed like Dan Quinn is really trying to replicate that with the 2 brains of Dirk Koetter and Mike Mularkey. So I really hope what they didn't do is just hand him, Shanahan's playbook and say, here, run this. Because I felt like that was where it really started to break down with Sarkisian. Not that I think Sarkisian would have been that great of a coordinator, especially after seeing him over the weekend in Alabama. I know you can go back and find things that I said I thought he was going to be okay, and I thought he was, but he proved me wrong. I can admit when I'm wrong. You know what I'm saying? I was totally, pegged wrong on Sarkisian. But part of that didn't help when you're trying to hand him somebody else's recipe book and say, here, cook these meals. Yeah, he could cook them, but he doesn't have that same knowledge, that same thing that made that meal special. You know what I'm saying? So I really hope that that's not what's going to happen this year. I really hope that they just let Koetter do his thing and run this how he wants to run it. That way he can get in a good flow. Because you can go back and look at Tampa, his years in Tampa, and obviously his years here in Atlanta. Scoring points wasn't really a concern, There was other aspects that were a concern when he was down in Tampa, but very rarely was it scoring points. But, if he takes some feedback from Mularkey, maybe we can create a little bit of exotic smash mouth here in Atlanta, which could be interesting, because now you have a variety of running backs in, the power with Quadre Olison and Brian Hill, and then the elusiveness and catching the ball out of the backfield with Quadre Olison and Devontae Freeman, obviously. And also with this stable of running backs, maybe you won't wear down Devontae as quickly as it has happened with his injury history. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but those are some of the things that I was thinking about with carrying 6 running backs on the roster. So that's what I got for y'all today. And as always, Falcons fans, rise up.